Okay, let's dive right into this explainer. Have you ever stopped to think about a massive, frankly unthinkable number? I'm talking about the astronomical opportunity cost of global fear. You know, you look at the staggering amounts of money, the brilliant minds, and the sheer industrial effort poured into creating and stopping weapons, and it's hard not to feel a profound sense of waste. Today, we're unpacking the underlying mechanisms of why our current geopolitical doom loop exists and how we might actually engineer our way out of it.
Here's how we're going to break this down today. We'll look at the high price of fear, the illusion of trust, seeing without standing, what happens when three worlds collide, what actually works, and finally, a pragmatic kind of hope.
Section 1. The high price of fear. Let's start with the sheer scale of human potential we sacrifice just to feel secure in a pretty fractured world. Think about it. Every single breakthrough in drone swarm intelligence, laser interception, or electronic warfare, that represents thousands of hours of absolute genius poured right down the defense drain. We've got brilliant software engineers and aerospace innovators spending their entire careers optimizing the trajectory of a piece of shrapnel, or, building massive continental drone shields like the Golden Dome. The trillions of dollars allocated to those defense systems, those are completely lost opportunities. That capital could literally permanently fund global clean energy grids. It could revolutionize sustainable agriculture or wipe out devastating diseases. Instead, the money just gets directed toward fear rather than actual human advancement. Section 2. The illusion of trust. So if the cost of all this fear is so undeniably high, why on earth can't nations just agree to trust each other and disarm? Well, the answer lies in a classic international relations concept called the security dilemma. Picture this. One nation builds a fence purely out of fear. Its neighbor looks over, perceives that fence as a barrier or a threat, and builds a watchtower. The first nation sees the watchtower and immediately buys a shield. Both sides are spending absolutely everything they have just to end up exactly where they started, staring at each other with mutual suspicion, but now with much emptier pockets. It's a massive collective action problem. Nobody wakes up wanting to waste trillions on shrapnel. It's simply a coordination failure driven by very rational fear. And here is the hard truth. This isn't actually a trust problem at all. It's a verification problem. Two nations can trust each other completely today, but intentions can change overnight with new leadership. Military capabilities, on the other hand, those cannot be uninvented. You can't unlearn how to build a missile. So just trusting more isn't the fix, because trust that isn't backed by verification leaves you completely exploitable. Section 3. Seeing without standing. So how does this exact verification problem play out in our shared environment? Well, we've actually solved the problem of seeing global pollution, all thanks to modern satellite infrastructure. Take MethaneSat. It operated on a remarkably small $88 million nonprofit budget, and it tracked precise emission plumes from trillion-dollar industries. We could finally see exactly who was doing what. But tragically, in June 2025, operators completely lost contact with MethaneSat. The literal eye we built to hold power accountable turned out to be fragile, with a shorter operational life than the emissions it was built to catch. But, even while it worked, it exposed a much deeper flaw. Just look at the natural experiment in the Permian Basin that the satellite data revealed. The data showed massive gaps between detected emissions and official reports. But the policy response? It split perfectly along incentive lines. New Mexico adopted rules to capture 98% of that gas by the end of 2026. Right next door, Texas had zero regulations and actively opposed federal methane rules. It was the exact same atmosphere, the exact same satellite data, but two totally different outcomes. Why? Because simply seeing the problem doesn't give you the legal standing to actually sanction the offender. The data doesn't arrive preloaded with authority. We solved the seeing part, but we definitely didn't solve having the standing to act on what we see. Section 4. When three worlds collide. This lack of standing interacts pretty dangerously with the massive global systems running our world. For decades, we relied on a good loop between the military and trade. It was this idea that trade ties naturally raise the cost of conflict. After all, you don't bomb your own supply chain, right? But the bad loop emerges when interdependence gets weaponized. The moment one country realizes it can survive cutting off a supply chain, like by slapping down chip bans or controlling access to trade routes, that dependency suddenly flips into a weapon. Trade stops being the peaceful alternative to military leverage and literally becomes a form of it. And these three worlds violently collide over critical minerals like lithium, cobalt, and rare earths. This is the sharpest point of fusion right here. These minerals are crucial military inputs for things like missile guidance and drones. They're a massive global trade choke point, with processing heavily concentrated in China. And at the exact same time, they're the literal supply chain for the global climate transition, making up our batteries and solar panels. Whoever controls this single choke point decides if the world's climate transition ships on time. It's one contested resource sitting smack at the center of all three games at once. Section 5. What actually works? Given these immense, overlapping challenges, what tools have historically proven effective at keeping the peace and protecting the commons? The historical pattern is actually remarkably clear. Back in 1951, the EU coal and steel community worked because it structurally pooled the literal raw materials of war, creating a jointly monitored resource. The 1959 Antarctic Treaty successfully demilitarized a whole continent because mutual restraint cost everyone zero. The 1987 Montreal Protocol worked because it had a narrow problem, visible symptoms, and real enforcement to stop ozone depletion. On the flip side, look at the New START nuclear treaty. It expired on February 5, 2026. Why? Because during the pandemic, on-site inspections halted and just never restarted. Once verification lapsed, trust lapsed right along with it. Treaties really only survive when they're backed by boring, well-funded verification infrastructure with actual teeth. So, to fix our current systems, we need practical steps that construct standing and create fast feedback loops. From the top down, we need multilateral carbon border adjustment mechanisms. Think of this as using trade leverage to enforce environmental accountability across borders, but doing it as a coalition so it doesn't just look like a trade war. We also need publicly funded, UN-administered satellite monitoring, so the planetary eye isn't just some fragile nonprofit asset. We absolutely have to diversify critical mineral supply chains to remove the temptation of using them as weapons. And from the bottom up, we can use divestment campaigns backed by hard climate trace data and build subnational agreements, kind of like the California-Quebec carbon markets, where defection is locally visible and easily sanctionable. Section 6. A pragmatic kind of hope. Let's conclude with a genuinely hopeful, cold, hard economic reality about where we're heading. Believe it or not, the most optimistic sign for our future isn't a diplomatic breakthrough at all. In 2025, global clean energy investment hit roughly $2.3 trillion. That is more than double what went into fossil fuels. For the first time in a century, renewables overtook coal in the global electricity mix. And the kicker? This isn't happening because nations suddenly decided to hold hands and trust each other about carbon emissions. It's happening because of cold, hard economics. Battery storage costs plummeted an astonishing 45% in a single year. Solar energy alone met 3/4 of the world's net new electricity demand. Even actors with absolutely zero environmental concern are choosing these technologies simply for cost reasons. This reveals the ultimate twist of our era. The energy transition is working because it has become a form of cooperation that requires absolutely zero trust to succeed. It doesn't need a massive verification regime or a promise, it just needs the machines to keep getting cheaper. But as we've explored today, this transition is quietly recreating a choke point of its own, with rare earth minerals. So as you reflect on this explainer, ask yourself this. Can the undeniable momentum of cheap, clean energy and our basic human preference for restraint outpace the friction of our fractured global trade? Can we diversify our supply chains and build the boring verification infrastructure we need before this new choke point triggers the ultimate security dilemma? That is the multi-trillion-dollar question for our future. Thanks for diving into this with me.